Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Ashley Mott. I'm the GIS manager at Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. And today we're presenting an online panel that's about mapping resources for coastal resilience planning and also emergency management. And we have some updates for our region from the Hurricane Center, NOAA, and FDEM. So I'm going to quickly go over today's agenda, and hopefully Cathie will join soon, and then she can take over from there. Again, welcome, and if you haven't done so already, just please drop your name and affiliation in the chat and Zoom. And just some logistics for today's meeting as well. We're going to be fielding questions from raised hands and Zoom chat, and you're free to speak after that point. We're hoping to do, kind of get through the panel presentations and hold those questions till the end so that we can just preserve the hour that we have and use it as well as we can. So I'm going to quickly go over the panel purpose in a minute, and then hopefully we can get started. So the reason we put this panel together is obviously the hurricane season's coming up, but just so that we can inform the region of the mapping resources that are available to you. And we're primarily focused on resilience planning and emergency management today. We're also hoping that our experts on the line can recommend some inundation mapping best practices. And we want to use this forum to connect you all with the state and federal partners. And we hope to facilitate technical assistant opportunities through these folks on the line today. So we're waiting on Cathie. I have not heard from her. Kara, do you think I should just press forward?
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe there was an emergency.
Yeah, I saw that Renee from Pinellas County wasn't able to join either. So yeah, maybe something came up. But if Cathie does hop on, I can certainly hand things over to her. And for those of you that don't know her, she's the director at Pinellas County Emergency Management. Oh, thanks, Andrew. Yeah. Maybe she doesn't have the link or something like that. But anyway.
I sent her an email too, Ashley.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. So I'm gonna let the panel introduce themselves. Billy, do you want to go first?
Sure. So hey everybody, good morning. My name is Billy Brooks. I'm with the NOAA Office for Coastal Management. We sit under the National Ocean Service, so kind of a sister line office to the Weather Service. Our office works with coastal states, communities, other federal agencies, really anybody working along the coast, primarily in the geospatial world. So the team that I work on, and then Matt Pendleton, he's also joining as our regional geospatial coordinator. We work on a lot of inundation related tools and data. So a lot of the things I'll very quickly cover today kind of dive into the inundation, whether it's vertical datums and DEMs all the way up to mapped outputs and how to best present information.
Thanks, Billy.
Ashley, it's Andy. I just spoke with Cathie. She's getting on right now. She hung up on me, so
okay.
getting on.
All right, cool. Thank you. Cody, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Cody Fritz. I lead the storm surge unit here at the National Hurricane Center. Our responsibility is obviously to not only provide storm surge forecasts for much of the United States and its territories, but in addition to that, we do a lot of the development of all the storm surge risk mapping that you might see. We'll talk a little bit about that today and what updates might come with that. But yeah, our responsibility is focused not on only just providing storm surge forecast information, but developing the risk information as well, but then get fed into evacuation studies and then downstream development of evacuation zones. So
thanks, Cody. Drew?
Yeah, Andrew Sussman. I'm the manager of the All Hazards Unit. I've been working on the evacuation studies since 2011, been involved in a number of evacuation study updates. Like to Cody's point, we work hand in hand with the National Hurricane Center and the counties and kind of connect everything together with the evacuation studies. We'll talk about it later in this, how much information goes into the studies and what's happening with the evacuation studies, hopefully between 2025 and 2030. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Drew.
Kathy
Hey,
is on,
Cathie.
Ashley.
Yeah, I see her. Hey, Cathie, we just got through introductions. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks. Sorry, everybody. You never know what's going to come up during your day in emergency management. Yes, good morning. My name is Cathie Perkins, and I am the director for Pinellas County Emergency Management. Been here almost 8 years, and I feel like I walked in the door and then COVID happened, and then last year's hurricane season that you all saw. So looking forward to hearing from all of our panelists today. And helping us as we move forward with our decision making, not only for disasters themselves, but also for resiliency.
Thanks, Cathie. So, Cathie, just to let you know where we're at, we're gonna start handing it off to the panelists. So, Billy, I'm gonna hand over the screen share to you. And if I can figure out how to do that on Zoom.
Ashley, you just stop sharing and then he'll be able to share.
All right, I can't tell if you can see my screen.
You can,
Could
Billy.
somebody confirm? Okay, awesome. All right, so I've got 10 minutes and there's a lot out there. There's no way you're gonna remember all of this. So we can send out links afterwards and answer any questions. And of course, Matt Pendleton is there kind of as our regional person and is happy to answer any questions or provide technical assistance through our office. So the first thing I want to touch on, and this is where you can find everything I'm going to talk about, is the NOAA Digital Coast. This website is maintained out of our office, but we have several partners that we work with, which include a lot of other federal agencies and resources. It's kind of I hate one-stop shop, but it's kind of that. And think of it as like a curated set of data, tools, information, and training for really anything along the coast. Specifically, in the topics section, we have a coastal inundation topic, and there you will find a lot of resources. We provide kind of brief descriptions of what these things are. And it's really a lot. And it links off to different parts of NOAA, different parts of other federal agencies. So that's really a great place to start. Thank you, Megan. So the things I'm going to cover just quickly. First off, more for long-term planning and resilience. We recently released the sea level calculator. Now, notice it's not the sea level rise calculator because sea level isn't going up everywhere. And so it's the sea level calculator, and really the big picture on this tool is that we've brought together a lot of different authoritative sources from different locations around NOAA and the federal government and brought them into one place. You can scroll down to learn more, but really the thing you do is just start searching for a location. You get dropped into this map. You can see kind of the availability of resources that we have. In this case, I'm just going to click on St. Pete. We have what we call quick views, and these are just different views of data around certain topics. So if you click on that, you're presented with kind of the 5 quick views that we have for this location. For more information, you can flip those cards over. Also, we have videos, so and that are specific to each one. So if you click on those, it will give you a good overview of what you can do with that information. Today, I just want to show quickly a couple of these. So the first would be our changes in flood frequency. So this is where we look at different thresholds and how many times they've occurred over the period of record for this tide station. And so these locations are the tide stations that NOAA operates and maintains around the country. So here's a count of the NOS minor flood threshold, if you're familiar with that. We have other thresholds in there. We know that the Weather Service within NOAA also has a set of thresholds, so we can calculate the number of times those have occurred, so the chart adjusts. You can also type in your own. So if you just type in, now let's say you know that 2.5 feet above mean high water is a problem. How many times has that occurred historically? You can set that as your custom threshold, and it recalculates. Maybe you notice that the map adjusted. So this is really inundation mapping, where the 0 is mean high water, and we've mapped on top of LiDAR-based DEMs for an area. So 2.5 feet mean high water looks like this on the map, and here's how many times it's occurred. And then we give some kind of future-looking information if you're looking at the NOS thresholds. So if you have a sea level rise scenario that you're looking at, let's say intermediate or intermediate low, you can say, like, how many times might that occur in the future? And let's say 100 times is too many annually. You can kind of set a threshold and see where that might occur going out to the future. Next, I want to highlight the extreme water levels quick view. So this is where we have brought in 2 different sources of kind of extreme water level data. It's important to note that we don't report on any 1% annual chance or 100-year value. That's really not our domain. That's FEMA and others. So we go up to what you could call the 50-year value, or the 2% annual exceedance probability. So here's where we can look historically at monthly max data and kind of see the events pop out. You could then say, well, I'm interested in, let's say, the intermediate low scenario. Here's what that probability might look like following that curve out to the future. Let's look at in 2025, the 10% annual exceedance probability is 2.93 feet. We can see what that looks like on the map. And then we can also see that what right now is the 10% going out into the future, let's say by 2060, based on this scenario, it becomes the 50%, so every other year, and eventually the every year value. The thing that I like about this quick view, and this will be the last thing, is you can expand to more of a map-based view. If you scroll down, we bring in the top 10 events by water level observed at the tide station. So Helene, if you click on Helene, this isn't modeled surge. This is just a water level above mean high water, but it's a decent approximation of what's happened. So you can kind of click through the different events and see those on the map. You can do a lot of things in here if you just start clicking around, like change your datum to NABD 88 if you want to. All the values change, and we take care of that for you. So lots of information in this tool. Kind of a simpler companion to that is our sea level rise viewer. You can search if you want to. I'm just going to zoom in to the region. And so you can see we have a sea level rise tab, scenarios, mapping confidence, marsh migration, and high tide flooding. The data that you see here is the same data we're bringing into the sea level calculator. So we're reusing a lot of the same information, just presented in a different way. In this case, again, our 0 is we start at mean high water and go up from there. And so you just start raising up the water level. And so regardless of what gets you to that water level, whether it's a winter storm or a tropical event, it's an approximation. We don't model how water is going to flow, but it is, if a water height around this gauge, around this location is going to be 3 feet, this is what that's going to look like because of the way we're doing the mapping with the LiDAR data, and then also a modeled tidal surface from another part of NOAA. Because there's some geospatial people on the call, everything you see is can be downloaded. So if you click on this link, It goes to our data download page. All of our digital elevation models are available. They come with metadata. In Florida, they're based on the most recent data as of last year. And so that's the typically 2017 to 2018 peninsular data that came out with a few other sources sprinkled in to fill in holes and gaps. I did notice recently that there are some in progress collections going on in the region. I think through the USGS for LiDAR. Once those are made available, we'll update our digital elevation models and remap, and those will be available here for download. Also, all of the mapped inundation data, whether it's depth rasters, kind of single value extent rasters, and then polygon data for all of those mapped levels for different areas of Florida. All right, I think I'm getting close to running out of time. For the emergency managers, another office within NOAA, the Center for Operational Oceanographic Products and Services, or co-ops, they maintain all the tide stations. They have what they call the inundation dashboard. And this is more of a real-time viewer to where you can actually see, because of the nor'easter that's coming through the East Coast right now, you can see elevated water levels in the mid-Atlantic going up to New York. And so as a tropical system is approaching, let's say Florida, you'll see these tide stations start pinging or highlighting, and you can click on them, and you can see basically you can get a forecast if there's a forecast available for the area, and then also how that corresponds to the different flood thresholds, and then you can get to a lot of other information in this resource. Lastly, because Ashley talked about inundation mapping methods, we have our coastal inundation mapping in-person course. It's a 2-day instructor-led course. We were planning to bring it to the region in, I think, this past April. That kind of got put on hold for a minute. We're hoping to bring it as soon as we are able. But this course covers everything from vertical datum transformations, water levels, how to take modeled water level outputs. So whether it's from a storm surge model, a tsunami model, and other sources, and then how to map that on LiDAR-based DEMs, how to edit and review those DEMs so they better capture how water is going to flow, and then how to present the results. So it's lecture exercises. So Matt and I are both instructors for that. And again, hopefully we will be able to bring it to the region soon if we had our way. We really enjoy giving the course. And if you have questions on any of the data, any of like the inundation mapping methods that we use, please let us know. Get in touch with Matt. You could even email Ashley and she can get in touch with us. I'll provide my email in the chat. And really the thing we enjoy doing is technical assistance, really helping people kind of take the data, apply the data. You know, if these tools and data are too coarse for your area, then we can help you talk through like mapping methods and how to take your own local data and map the same products at a higher resolution with a little bit more confidence for your area. All right, and Ashley, I think, I don't know where I'm at 10 minutes, 12 minutes, but that's all I've got. All right.
Thanks, Billy.
Yep.
Great. Thank you for that, Billy. And I'll just say from even an EM point of view, the sea level rise maps were really helpful to us when we were trying to look at inundation for tropical storms, and being able to already have that map in place to be able to project out to the public. Certainly some of our communities like Shore Acres, Riviera Bay, some of our other barrier island communities, it was very helpful to be able to see where that inundation is. And it's very scary to think that that could be our regular normal situation in the future years. Next, I'd like to bring up Cody Fritz, who I have on speed dial. And when we have to start looking at storm surge levels that are going above where even the sea level rise projections show us for tropical storms, Cody is really remarkable at helping us honing in on the direction of the storm, really trying to help us interpret the data, making sure that we're putting out the right information. We have a lot of healthcare facilities, vulnerable populations that we have to evacuate even before the general populations. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cody Fritz from the National Hurricane Center.
Yeah, thanks, Cathie. Appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. Cathie and I probably talk 1,000 times in an event, so it's good to have that relationship. I don't really have anything to share in terms of like a visual. Really, what I wanted to do was, given this opportunity, allow anyone to ask various questions. Certainly, we can reserve those till after this. But as far as updates for this hurricane season, specifically, and as it relates to the Tampa Bay area, we're only really updating our national risk perspective of storm surge. So there's not a lot of new modeling that's gone into your particular area. Primarily what we've done is just really update the elevation information that goes into the development of that risk map. To William's point, we incorporate all of that most recent DEM data that exists. So anything post 2017, that LIDAR data that was been sampled now exists in that risk mapping. So for the most part, not any of the modeling has changed. I know there were a few questions about, well, what does that do to the Tampa Bay region? Not a whole lot with respect to the storm surge specifically. Just again, it resamples the DEM data that goes into it. And so we have a more realistic view of what the elevation is for those particular areas. And we usually update those maps probably every couple of years. So when you think about sea level rise and how that might get impacted and how that might affect the maps, we can account for that because we do update them pretty frequently to kind of account for any of those changes. Sea level rise doesn't happen as fast as we update them. So I think that's kind of what the point you made there. I don't really have, I really wanted to just open it up for questions. So Cathie and Ashley, I mean, when we get to that point, I can really answer anything that people have specifically about, the storm surge modeling that we do, what we use, how it'll change in the future. I know there are other questions that people have, so I just want to leave all that time available for those questions to be asked. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Cody. And, I'll just say, so I think, as we all saw, the critical infrastructure that sits down very close to the coastline, and, obviously our sanitary sewage systems, they rely on gravity, right, to pull all of that down. And I think what was maybe a bit surprising to us is just how vulnerable they were. So we saw in St. Petersburg, their one Northeast plant, when we were looking at 4 to 7 feet of storm surge, the concern that they were going to have to take that offline. And then certainly with Milton following up in the following week or 10 days, that one we were projected at 10 to 15 feet. So, looking at the vulnerability of their other plant and, just knowing that they service a large area of our community that is non-evacuation, and just the number of critical facilities that were down in that area, the shelters that we had. And, I think a good point, right? So as we look at not only the storm surge projections, but also the projections for sea level rise, as we're investing money for capital improvements and mitigation, taking all of this into consideration is just so important. And I think, we are GIS rich. We've got a lot of great data. And the more that we can do to continue to bring that data together and kind of talk across all of our various departments and entities for how do we better plan to make our communities more resilient so we can get back up and running quicker. So I know probably a lot of people have questions for Cody, but we're going to go to Andrew Sussman next, who's going to talk about the evacuation studies and really helping us kind of how do we make those projections when we get that dreaded storm surge projection or that a hurricane is coming our way. How do we make sure that we get people out of harm's way in a timely manner and just the complications of that. So Drew, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Same thing. I don't have a PowerPoint, and I'll try not to even talk the full 10 minutes. Even I'm more excited of the questions that we might get. So I know everyone's wondering. You go online to www.floridadisaster.org res/res. You see these regional evacuation studies. Just to give a little context, we've been doing the evacuation studies this way under this methodology since 2010. It was first published this way. Which stemmed from the 2004-2005 hurricane seasons. Before that, evacuation studies around the state had been completed under different methodologies, different timelines. They didn't always line up. They weren't always uniform. So 0405 really led the charge, a lot of discussions to say, no, we need a uniform methodology across the state. We need to ensure that all counties get the same level of information. And so that's how we've been doing it since 2010. Just the process of making an evacuation study, it takes about a year. There's an evacuation model. We've had this model called TIME, the Transportation Interface for Modeling Evacuations. It utilizes software that the Department of Transportation had been using for a number of years, up until a few years ago. They're no longer supporting it, so I'll talk about that. The Department of Transportation is actually building us a new evacuation model. They started last year. They committed $1 million to creating a new model. They've committed about another $1 million to actually updating the model. So let me pivot and I'll get back to why that's important. So we have this evacuation model. So to get from start to finish, when we start the year-long project, we did it back in 2020, 2021. For some regions, we had to do it in 2017 when we got a new South Florida super basin, affected about 5 regional evacuation studies in the Southern Peninsula. We did it in 2015 statewide, and of course 2010, the original publishing. So from start to finish is first, we're focused so much on the model during that 1 year period, updating this evacuation model. There's 5 major data sets that we put into this evacuation model. And it is the state of Florida in an evacuation transportation model, how we think people will behave, the roads we think they'll use, and which roads are more popular than others, the evacuation zones that counties provide. I actually have a silly acronym that kind of helps me remember the 5 major data sets. It's BERPS with an E, so BERPS. So B is behavioral information. We actually do study how people have behaved in previous hurricanes. There have been times where there were surveys done asking people what they might do in a future hurricane, giving them the parameters. 2020, 2021, we were able to study anonymous smartphone data of the 2016 through 2018 hurricane season. So you think Matthew was a notable hurricane, Irma 2017, Hurricane Michael 2018. We even studied like Hurricane Nate hit near Pensacola. We probably won't be doing any behavioral on the next update. We're still using the behavioral information that we've had for a couple of years, so I could take some questions on that later. The E, the second letter is evacuation zones. So like what Cody talked about, with the National Hurricane Center providing the storm surge information, and the counties draw their evacuation zones based on that. So it's not the storm surge information that's necessarily going to the evacuation model. It's the county evacuation zones really is the cornerstone of the model, defining that where the problem is, where to who needs to evacuate. So, we have the evacuation zones in there, but we also have it broken up by the site built mobile homes. So we get parcel data in there. So that's kind of skipping ahead to the letter P. So population demographics information in that BERPS. So we have site built mobile homes. We try to update that data. We have the roadway network. So that's the R in the acronym. We work with the Department of Transportation on that. And we also provide that information. A lot of this information in that year-long process we're providing to counties, making sure they see the information that's going to go into the model. Good data in, good data, good results coming out. And so we want to make sure you guys see that information. Does it reflect your local picture? Some things that have popped up, we've had counties before where it's like, hey, there's certain roads that aren't in the model. We'd like to add those roads. And so some of the limitations of the previous model we had, we would try to add as many roads as possible before it would crash the model, so to speak. So I've gone through, behavioral, evacuation zones, roadway networks, population demographics. The S is shelters. So we know public sheltering is a component of evacuation planning. And so we work with counties. We know we have information at DEM that you guys work through the statewide emergency shelter plan, the shelter retrofit stuff. That we have your public sheltered capacities and locations, but we still, when we're going through this update, we still like to take that data and work with you all to make sure it's accurate and it reflects how you would open those shelters in there. Once the model's good, once we've gotten all that data, we know it's blessed, we know it's as current as can be, it's the best data we could find. If there's any limitations in it, we certainly document that, make sure it's documented in the evacuation study so you guys know the strengths and weaknesses of the evacuation study. And then there's there's a little over 220 evacuation scenarios we model statewide. So if you go into your evacuation study in your region, you'll see there's usually about 20 different evacuation scenarios. And you're looking at a base scenario, you're looking at operational scenarios. You've been looking at scenarios for 2020 and 2025. I hope next year give you scenarios that will give you new 2025 clearance times and even project out to 2030. Can't believe I can say that. But yeah, 2030 is on the horizon now. So from there, we run those. We have vendors. We make sure there's no anomalies. Models sometimes don't run right, so we got to figure out why that scenario didn't run right. So we have a lot of tech support. Once we have all 220-ish, I think it's like 224 scenarios. If you guys want more scenarios, we can run them. We once again, we provide that to the county emergency management directors before it is officially published. We go over because we know with growing populations and roadway networks expanding, sometimes there can be a little bit of sticker shock with the new evacuation clearance time. So we want to be able to answer all your questions. We want you to understand the data in front of you. So once we know the counties are reasonably good with it, then it officially goes on the floridadisaster.org /RES. So that's kind of the soup to nuts, so to speak, of making the study. So what's going on right now to share with you all is, yes, unfortunately, given things lately, we all know the budget situation is pretty interesting. I have received no funding to actually update the evacuation studies. So if it wasn't for what the Florida Department of Transportation is doing right now, I don't know how we'd even be producing an evacuation study next year. So I'm grateful. I guess over the past couple of years, some folks at the Department of Transportation have kind of shifted their focus. So they want to be more involved in supporting modeling efforts around the state, and recognizing the evacuation modeling is huge. And where we've been using the softwares that they use, they now are picking up the tab, so to speak. And so I know for many of us in the project management world, project management's a lot of fun, but paying for the project can be challenging. So I'm very grateful that DOT is picking up the tab on this. So starting soon, I've been in a number of meetings with the vendors and DOT, and there's a lot of little kickoff meetings internally going on. But through the rest of this year, you will start seeing those interactions. Some of you that have been through the process before, you'll see DOT, myself, the vendors, the regional planning councils will be working with you to get that, verify that data. They'll provide new census data or American Community Surveys data. We use the population demographic data, the roadway network data. We will go through that. So it'll seem very familiar to those who've been through the process before as an evacuation study update. But then next year, DOT, I've asked them if they'll support me when I go to run the scenarios, if they'll pay for any tech support issues with them. So if I run into any issues running the 200 scenarios, same thing, we'll work with all the counties to make sure, do you agree with the scenarios we're doing? I kind of don't want to go too far into it, but we have the base scenarios, the operational scenarios. We have some scenarios that we run that we keep them the same way, like a baseline throughout the state. They're very conservative scenarios, but that way we can really measure the impacts in the regions. We try to afford you all operational scenarios. I believe with the new model, it runs a lot faster than our previous model. So I'm actually hoping if you guys want more scenarios, it won't take as long to do it. So I'm glad to see with the emerging technologies that, we're able to run some very large complex scenarios a lot faster than we used to. It used to take me 3 days to get the results of running a worst case South Florida scenario. It would take me 2 to 3 days to get the worst case results of a Southwest Florida or even a Tampa Bay scenario. So some of the testing we've done on the model, I see it's shaving a lot of time off. So next year, like I said, next year DOT will support me in that effort. And then, like I said, what's going to be that critical juncture is, do I have any funding to enlist the regional planning councils to assist me with the final publishing of the study? Or am I doing it in-house with my staff and maybe relying on the regional coordinators to help set up meetings? So I'd really like to spread the work around more. I mean, this is a very large evacuation study, so 10 regional planning councils can bring in at least 1 or 2 staff. That helps a lot. And so I'm hoping I can do it that way, but that's going to be funding dependent. So I know that was a lot, so I think I'll stop there. And same thing, let's get into questions.
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, I remember so I used to work in Miami-Dade, and when we would run the time model, I think we crashed it so many times just trying to run all the number of scenarios and cars evacuating out of the area. And I did put in the chat, University of South Florida is conducting a survey on risk perception and evacuation decision-making. And to Drew's point, that behavioral analysis is so critical, right? Like we have all this great data, right? We can see where the storm surge is potentially going to be. We have this projection for how much time it's going to take people to go. But at the end of the day, it's up to the individuals and their behavior that makes a big difference. I'll just say for Hurricane Helene, we had hundreds of water rescues that occurred. And unfortunately, we had 12 deaths during Helene from people that chose not to evacuate, right? From surge that was projected, and we told people these were the areas. So that behavioral analysis is key. From an emergency management viewpoint, we like to use those studies to help us look at what is the messaging that we need to get out. And I'm just super happy to see, the National Hurricane Center, all these different groups that do behavioral studies, even when we're doing the maps for evacuation zones, the colors that we choose, right? How do we express the risk to people? When Drew gives you 220 scenarios and the National Hurricane Center gives you these directional meows and all these moms, there's a lot of tough choices that we have to make in terms of exactly how we present this to the public. And I just love the collaborative work that we've all been doing over the years to help get that messaging out and to refine it even more. So Ashley, do we have any questions in the chat, or were you going to have people raise their hands?
Yeah, I would say if anybody wants to raise your hand with the Zoom function, or drop it in the chat, or if you want to interject, that's good too. Yeah, while we're waiting for the first questions to come in, Cathie, I did want to let everybody know, I dropped in the chat that the RPC, we're just collecting some information about use cases of the evacuation study that might be outside of that traditional like county emergency management use. So that, or if you use it for county EM work too, please fill out that survey. I told Drew I would share that information with him as well. We just want to know everybody that's using the study, and just get some other metrics about that.
Yeah, actually, one of the things that I find interesting too is whenever a community is increasing their density, right? So we'll often receive this to do a review from our viewpoint, but it looks at, and Drew, I don't know if you can speak to this, right? So it looks at like clearance time of just that particular jurisdiction. And that's always a challenge for us because, St. Petersburg may be increasing their density, but that has a cascading impact, right? Because the evacuation doesn't stop just once they cross the St. Petersburg municipal boundary, right? Because then all those folks bleed into all the other communities. And one of the things that we saw, Drew, we did a study, we did an analysis for how far people traveled to go to shelter. And on average, it was 4 miles. So, they're not traveling long distances, but I just think from a planning perspective, right, when we're looking at people evacuating and density increases in communities, can you maybe speak to that? And, why is it just at that jurisdictional level?
So, I mean, once again, when it comes to the development, whoever the jurisdiction that owns it, it doesn't, sometimes people I know, obviously, when some development's happening in a local city and then they want to involve the county and they want to involve the state, but a lot of the time that development, really the responsibility goes back to the local jurisdiction. To Cathie's point, we have been a bit limited in being able to provide just for that one, like I've had that question come up for years going, hey, this 200 unit condo on some barrier island is getting built. How's it going to affect the clearance times? And maybe at best in the current model, seeing an extra hour or something added to like the A zone clearance time might have caught it, but it wasn't that good. Like the model had limitations. I'm very excited to share with you the new PTV model. It's gonna, it's the time model, but now it'll be time in PTV where it was time in City Labs Cube Avenue. That model has the ability to actually get down to that level. So hate to hit you with some terms that even I'm still trying to learn myself, but when I do the county and regional modeling with the county emergency management, I'm doing mesoscopic modeling is what they tell me. And then getting down to this level that you're talking about, you really want something that's in the micro simulation type of modeling. And so the new PTV model has that capability to do both. So that's something going forward. Currently what DOT is doing is they're using the time model that we've had for 17 years as the blueprint. So, I mean, as best as we can make it apples to apples, keeping the methodology. One thing I've been a big proponent of trying to keep the methodology as uniform as it's been. Now, when it comes to the evacuation scenarios, like I said, we can give you extra scenarios, but there's a couple of baseline scenarios we like to keep statewide because, once again, historically, that the evacuation study in 2010 that was published had county emergency management staff and directors from around the state heavily involved in that process. So, I mean, your peers and predecessors helped that methodology. That question was constantly asked, knowing the storms you went through from 92 Andrew to 0405, what would you want for future decision making? And so, I mean, that's why that methodology, I think it's important to try to keep the methodology as uniform as possible. But of course, with all the new features and new expansions, let's add to it. Let's, add more features. I mean, nobody wants to keep driving the same car from 20 years ago. I'm still driving a car from 20 years ago, but I'm excited when I can have a car that has newer and more features than a 2005 Ford Expedition. So that's where I'm thrilled with the capabilities of this, questions that have been difficult to ask before or answer before. Well, now we'll be able to get into that area. So.
Yeah, thanks. I always thought it would be interesting if we looked at the actual comp plans and what we thought we could develop out to, and like, what would that impact be? Like if we truly developed to that capacity. And then I see like these increases in density, like if you cumulatively look at that, doesn't sound like a lot when you're looking at a building, but when you start to add that up across an entire county, just incredible increases. Ryan Clark, you have your hand up?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have two. So the first one is more general. Do we know if anybody from FDEM, NOAA, and that our National Weather Service is working on a color and symbology model for disability? Because we have to worry about, as of April 2026, all printed and online maps are supposed to be compliant with all disabilities, including color blindness. I didn't know if that was something that we have an active, if anybody else is working on it. We kind of have started touching on ours a little bit here locally, but we didn't know if there's more of a collaborative effort up higher.
I'll have to follow up on that one. I'd work with my communication staff, and certainly we can work on something to meet that requirement.
Okay. And then I guess my second one is actually going to be for Mr. Fritz, I think. I know that during every storm, you guys do send out the inundation and tidal mass raster files. And currently they are generated per storm in a new link with a new storm name. And we are trying to automate the process as much as possible. Part of the problem with it being unique to each storm and having to link to each storm is we have to tell it to go look for something we don't know exists yet. I didn't know if there was any plans or if there's any way we could have those put in a central location so that way we could have a crawler look at one spot rather than having to go look for a new web page every time. Because right now we've got it to where it'll pull in the raster, colorize it, clip it to our county, and then we're working on the push to AGL so we can have, what normally would take us an hour to process by hand to be automated in under 15 minutes. And we've got the back end out of it pretty much ratified. All we have to do is download the images from your site, but I didn't know if there's any plans or if there's any way to have a central place to go find those.
No, I mean, you can find them a couple of ways. I think one thing we can do, we can obviously talk offline about what you're really what you're trying to do, and maybe we can find a way to help improve that process. But in a general sense, yeah, every geotip that we develop is based or formatted based on the storm ID, right? There's no way, we don't really separate that part out of it, and then it can get pushed into, we do have it located on a central GIS area. So I'm curious where you're really pulling it from, because you can kind of get it from two places. So maybe we can talk about that. We can talk about that through email if that might help.
Yeah, that probably would. We're currently, we're hitting that page where the storms show up and then clicking on the storm and then waiting for the updates to then download the zip files, uncompress them, and process them. Yeah.
Is it through our the GIS URL? Do you?
I think so. It's I think it's the. Let me just remember the page, it's the Hurricane Center, the NHC dot, I think it's nhc.noaa.gov. That
Yeah.
page.
Uh-huh.
So,
And then
yeah, sorry.
And then, yeah, we have a GIS page associated with that. But you're right. I mean, they're not going to show up until that storm exists. That's the problem with that. I don't know. Maybe we can work it out. We can try to figure out some details that might help with the processing of that.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's just we're having a vendor kind of work with us too to see if they can figure out a good way. It's just,
Okay.
it's a lot of if-thens trying to find the storm if we don't know the name. I didn't know if like there's a repository of like IDs we can just refer to, like if that's how the hyperlinks are done. And that's the thing, because there's nothing live, I can't compare what it's going to look like right now as it did last year. And this is something we thought of after the storms because
Okay. I mean, we do archive all that data too, so you could use older storms.
yeah, no, I definitely I can process the images, but it's more about having a robot go look for it for me. So that's one less thing to worry about. So I can do the other jobs that somebody's like, hey, we need this right now.
Right.
Because you know how it is during a storm.
Okay. All right. Let's work through. Yeah, let's work behind the scenes and see if we can find a solution for you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So Allison put a link in the chat, and I was just wondering if she could speak to it a little bit.
Yeah, so I found this resource. It's specific for map making that it's able to help you figure out what kind of hue you want to use for your maps. And it does have a color blind safe option. So you can know if it's colorblind accessible. It also has if it's print friendly, what it would look like, and you can customize it. So sometimes I use this when trying to decide what the best palette is to use, just because, using rainbow doesn't always mean the most accessible.
Yeah. And we've been looking into stuff like this too. It's just that I think for the new guidelines, it's a little gray. Because you know how it is whenever they make rulings like this, it's always a little gray. It's supposed to be variating colors and symbology. And I think that's where we're running into issues. Because how do you make a evacuation level map symbolized when you're so used to having defined lines with color structure? And it's finding that one step, that one piece that makes it all fit together is I think what we're hitting for us personally. And I just was out there at large, see if anybody has had great success or an idea. So I don't know. Well, hopefully we'll get clarification on what guidelines we have to use because the federal government's been a little bit vague other than that it has to meet a disability standard, but they haven't specified whose standards, whether it's W3C, whether it's the European model, like so.
And Ryan, did you say it had to be for printed maps as well as online maps?
New maps, anything new after April of 2026 for populations over 100,000. I think I'd have to double check the numbers. I know that smaller areas have an extra year, but like Manatee County, we're already outside of that threshold.
Okay.
So
That's good to know. Thank you.
I'll find it and I'll share it.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I hadn't heard of that. I know we do everything ADA now, but this sounds like additional. So Ashley, you had a question for Billy?
Yeah, Billy, I was managing some direct messages. Did you show folks how to get at the projected high tide flooding days? I think there's some people on the call that might be interested in that, but sorry if I missed it.
Nope. Good question. I was just typing. So in the sea level calculator, yes, we do show so big picture, there are a couple sets of thresholds. So the National Ocean Service thresholds, we show the mapped extent of those three. So minor, moderate, and major, based on kind of some back-end modeling. Whenever a National Weather Service threshold is selected, again, minor, moderate, or major, we show the closest sea level rise extent on the map. So we kind of take care of that behind the scenes. All of those data are available for download also through the Sea Level Rise Viewer data download page. As far as the projections going out to the future, those are available for the National Ocean Service thresholds, all three of them. And those come from the 2022 Interagency Sea Level Technical Report that came out a couple years ago.
Thank you.
Hey, I saw Kara's question in the comment about the 2026 tip. Will the evacuation study be ready in time for the 2026 hurricane season? So I did want to address that. It's going to be an interesting situation because DOT, I know their timeline of wrapping up the new model that'll have the capability to run it. It's going to get pretty close to June of next year. And so I don't know if there'll be an opportunity for me to kind of get like the final draft version of the model because I'm hoping I'll be involved in the testing of it as well. So once the model's built and they test it, I've even said like, hey, can we start running some of the very high population evacuation scenarios, you know, your C, D, and E scenarios for the testing phase. So that way we can fix anything we find, but then also we know we have solid clearance times to show folks, hopefully in the months leading up to it. If I'm unable, the new FDOT model, I'll also speak to that in a second. I just saw that chat. So if we're getting to June and I really don't have a good model yet, and if it happens after June, then what we would do is we would prioritize a number of scenarios. Like we would run all like the base C through E clearance times around the state quickly, get that to the counties to discuss. You know, it may not be significant changes in the clearance times. Surprisingly, I know with more people moving to Florida, you're quick to assume, oh, the clearance times are going up. But in some of the previous evacuation study updates, you know, I can't speak for what's going to happen next year, but in the past, there have been times where I saw the 20, like for example, in one region, the 2020 clearance times were higher than the 2025 clearance times. And so when we studied why that was the case, it turned out there was a number of roadway improvement projects projected in 2025 that helped keep the clearance times down. So that's always the challenge. It's a race between how many people move here and how do the roads expand to meet that. So I mean, there's ways to do it, but like I said, if we get into June, I would prioritize running the base scenarios, the C through E scenarios, you know, the high population evacuation scenarios first, get that to the counties to review them. And then, you know, counties ultimately decide what they want to do. I mean, while the study gets published, the numbers you use are the numbers you use, and the numbers you want in HEREVAC or in your local planning products, you direct that. I mean, we'll support you in getting the numbers into HEREVAC if you use HEREVAC, stuff like that. And then, yeah, that question. So we're still calling it the time model, the transportation interface for modeling evacuations, but the model that's used for it used to be City Labs, Cube Avenue. Now you can Google it. It's a company called P, like P as in Peter, PTV, Peter Time Victor. I don't know what the PTV stands for, but the model is called Visum, VISUM, V as in Victor. So it's going to be the time model in PTV Visum.
Hey, Drew, I'd love to see some analysis done for our healthcare facilities too. I mean, when we get to a level 5, our level E evacuation, that's like 140 hospitals, nursing homes, and assisted living facilities. Alan Biddlecombe, you have your hand up.
Hi, everybody. Hey, good talks, good stuff here. Question for Billy and really anybody. Not sure how to articulate this, but has to do with LiDAR data collection, new LiDAR coverage. Our last was in 2017, 18, approximately. And I know that Hillsborough and Pinellas are working with USGS and their contractor to fly and collect aerial LiDAR anew, higher resolution, better all around. That's happening this past winter, and I don't know if it's done or not. But anyway, we've been approached in Pasco County. We've been approached to do all of Pasco County or a majority of Pasco County. And we haven't been able to really get it into the budget yet. So I'm wondering if there's any commentary that anybody can provide on the utility of new LiDAR coverage. You know, maybe give me an extra bullet point justification for trying to get it budgeted, let's say. Any comments on that?
I can take a crack at that. So I guess it would depend on the quality level of the LiDAR being collected. I'm assuming maybe somebody knows that the the data that's being collected in the region is probably quality level 1. And what that gets you is a higher density of returns per square meter, which means you can resolve more detail. It means you can map at a higher resolution. And when it comes to inundation modeling and mapping, let's say you're trying to input data into a stormwater model. Those are going to be very high resolution, covering very small watersheds. And so that the higher the resolution of the data, the higher the vertical accuracy of the data, the higher confidence you're going to have in the outputs. If the data are more sparse, you're not going to necessarily capture the detail for something like a very high resolution stormwater model. When it comes to more like countywide regional mapping, we're in the new data we're seeing, we're looking at 0.5 meter resolution. So about 1.5 feet cell size. That's a massive amount of data, but you're also resolving a lot of detail. And if at a local level, you're also incorporating, culverts and drainage structures or flood control structures into the actual DEM, which then can get translated into the modeling. You're getting a better representation of what could happen in an event. Also, depending on the amount of time that's passed since the last collect. So, at this point, 5 years. Wait, what year is it? 2025. So 7 years, 6 or 7 years, a lot can change in the landscape also. With any new development, you're going to see more impervious surface, which means water is going to flow more and not be absorbed into the ground. That can be captured in the data. You'll also see coastal change. So along the immediate coast, whether it's a change in, I think maybe you only have mangroves down in that part of Florida, but wetlands and mangroves are going to change. When a storm rolls through, it changes things. And so you'll see different changes in the landscape along the shoreline and along the coast. I don't know if those reasons are helpful enough for you, but those are kind of the things we consider as we work with LiDAR data and incorporate it into our products.
I was just going to add, I'm glad you brought that up because we kind of talk really closely with USGS a lot. And in fact, given Helene and Milton from last year, it's really important for us to know what changes have occurred along the beachfront. So we want to have a good idea of what those dune profiles are, what dunes are still available, because it basically helps us with understanding what the new predictability of storm surge will be in a given event. So when you lose kind of like, Billy was saying, changes to the coast to some extent, that can affect probably marginal storm surge events more so. So maybe, a weak storm didn't produce as much storm surge as before because you had protection. But with no protection, now those marginal storms become more impactful. And so those are kinds of things that we like to be aware of going into any hurricane season. So a better understanding of what that beach looks like, especially for that point of view, really helps us in our predictability of storm surge. It doesn't have as much of a big impact on those more extreme events because unfortunately dune protection won't be as helpful, but certainly in marginal events, that kind of stuff really helps us a lot.
Yeah, and Cody, I know we've talked a lot about our beach erosion.
Mm-hmm.
In previous events, we knew that when we were starting to see levels above 4 feet for storm surge predictions,
Yep.
that was a key indicator that we would have flooding in homes, and the difference between nuisance flooding and, the more life-threatening surge. So yeah, something we've got to continue to look at. And I'm kind of curious if we went back and looked at the stormwater planning, right? Like how well did the numbers, right? Like, so if you had something that was planned for a 100-year event, like how well did it perform in relation to the heavy rain events that we had? And I think the point that, every time there's a change in development or, things are overgrown or if they're not maintained, all of that impacts the ability of that stormwater to drain off. So I'm curious if anybody saw, like, did what you think was going to flood, is that what flooded? Did you see differences? Because I know as we move forward, I think the ability to kind of look at maybe some of that inland flooding with heavy rain events is really critical for us as well.
Hey, Cathie, I see we're 3 minutes past 11, so I don't want to keep anybody behind if they need to go, but I'm gonna leave the call open till 11:30, so anybody that wants to stick around, we can talk.
I have a random off question actually for Cathie that I want to reach out to you on.
Sure.
So I work at UF, but I'm also the Geoplan Center, but I also teach a GIS2 class. And I recently had to take a census assignment that I had and switch it because it was not allowed anymore, I would say. So I switched it to be an evacuation kind of study for Pinellas County. And so it looks at vulnerable populations and populations that say don't have access to vehicles or are economically disadvantaged. And what it does is it looks at those populations that live in the evacuation zones A and M. And then it looks at shelter locations. And then it kind of looks at how do we create maybe like a busing transfer location for these vulnerable populations that live further from shelters. And so I kind of wanted to like touch base with you on that to make this assignment a little bit more connected to real world like needs and requirements at some point.
Yeah, we'd love that. We work very closely with PSTA for transportation, and basically in here in Pinellas, every bus route can become an evacuation route. In Miami-Dade, we had specific bus pickup points where people could go, but sometimes they're kind of far away from where they live. And I would really love to we've got 240 mobile home parks in Pinellas.
Yeah.
44,000 units. And a lot of times those folks may be the ones that are more transportation challenged. And I think, what is the distance? What is the closest location of the bus stop to some of these vulnerable populations? One of the challenges we had between Helene and Milton is, and even after Debbie, we had a lot of people that lost cars due to flooding. People in the surge zones, we can say, hey, you really need to move your cars, even though some of them didn't. But the inland area is much harder. So we had a lot of people that lived in apartment complexes and they lost their vehicles. So that became another challenge with the transportation. So yeah, Katie, I'd love to get together with you and, bring some additional folks in so we can really do that analysis. We see there's a lot of vulnerable folks out there, and the more that we can do to convey messaging to them and better understand if there's things that we can tweak or make better to help people, we're all for it.
Yeah, I think so, because we're teaching to urban and regional planners and GIS specialists. So these are people that are going to be trained and then go out in the field. And I really want them to have like a real world scenario that they can then go and apply.
Yeah.
So I think it would be helpful to both.
Yeah, wonderful. Great.
Thanks.
Yeah, please feel free to reach out to me. I put my information in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Who else wants to do a study or get together? We'd love to work with folks. And if you've got GIS, if you've got people that want to come and do internships or come work with us, sit in on our meetings and hear our discussions, we love to get new perspectives and new ideas, things that we can do better. And everything from the initial, when we're planning the communities in the future, the road improvements, whatever we can look at, the aging population, just how everything changes. So, I think we're going to see a lot of changes in even the coming years as people elevate their properties, as we're implementing our community development block grant programs. We've got a lot of money that'll be coming in for mitigation projects. So I think we really want to make sure that we're considering, everything that we can as we are rebuilding our community and what can we do to make things better. Ryan.
Hey, again, kind of along that lines then, do we know if there's any source for like historical watershed topology? Like, because we have a lot of communities that are being built up over old tributaries, water flows, a lot of flooding that we saw down here in Manatee County during Debbie was because of new build. It feels like to us, that's maybe a perception. I don't know if it's true. Obviously, I know that there's always studies and stuff, but I didn't know if there was like a respective data source we can refer back to, because Manatee County before the 40s was a swamp. I don't know if most of the state of Florida is kind of like that too. So I didn't know if we had anything or anybody
Yeah.
knows of anywhere I can go look.
Ashley, or I know we've got one of my GIS people, April, was on the line. I don't know if we've got that.
Yeah, I was gonna ask maybe Kate from Geoplan, or maybe, I don't know if Marcus is on the line from TBEP. I don't know of a source, Ryan, sorry.
Hi, this is Andy over at Pasco. We have a very in-depth watershed map that I don't know if you put your email in the chat, but I can get a copy of it over to you if you would like to see it.
Of course, the more information we have, the better, I think. And we have a stormwater engineer who is always referring back to us to try to get better information. We've got a stream gauge network, and we access the state and the NGS's river gauge network that we're constantly monitoring. So anything we can have, because one of the big questions is always about tiger dams, where we're going to put up tiger dams.
And I never want to hear tiger dams again.
Sorry, but it's the word.
Yeah, we had a lot of conversations about tiger dams and, the efficacy of putting them in areas where there could be the strong wave action and everything. We had a hospital that used one, and because it wasn't anchored properly, the water actually went underneath it. And then, the thing that you want to be careful about is you're not creating swimming pools, or you're not having areas where water would normally have an ability to drain out. Now it can't, because we created a water barrier there that we were hoping would help people. So yeah, I have a lot of admiration for the counties that have all these rivers. I know, Andy, when we met even a couple of weeks ago, you still had some inland flooding in areas. So certainly a challenge to work with. And I know they're doing some studies, I think, over in Hillsborough as well. Ashley, I don't know if you've got any information, or if there's anybody from Hillsborough on.
We got some Hillsborough County GIS folks on the line. I don't know if they want to pipe up at all.
Maybe before they do, or maybe getting up the courage to do so. So out of our office, we have our coastal change analysis program. It's 30-meter resolution land cover data, so it's coarse. But if you're looking for data, and I just checked, and it goes back to 1996 in that region, and goes up through 2021, 2022. So you could get land cover change in that time period. So maybe not as far back as you'd like, but for newly-ish developed areas, you might be able to say this was a wetland area that is now developed, and look at that change. And so I'll put that in the chat, the link to where you go download that.
Awesome. Any other thoughts or questions? Ashley, our next steps, any chance of maybe getting a class at some point in the future?
Yeah, Billy mentioned that, once we're able to reschedule that class with NOAA, and we definitely want to have it at the Regional Planning Council. I was able to, that's where I met Billy and Doug, who's not here, but I took the one at UF in November, and it was awesome. I really enjoyed it and learned a lot. So yeah, we'll get that going as soon as possible. I did want to make an additional note, Cathie. I think you guys can see my PowerPoint, but anyway, I just wanted to say, I think it would be helpful to the region if we got together in a similar fashion to talk over riverine and flooding from extreme rainfall, especially for those of us in Pinellas County, Hillsborough County, the rain from Milton and from September 2024 was a big wake-up call. So I think addressing those needs, with a panel of this kind would be helpful first step.
Yeah, Sarasota and Manatee as well. And I think even Pasco had a lot of inland flooding. I think, Joe, did you have a question or a comment?
I did, in the interim, Cody answered it. Thank you, Cody.
Yeah,
I
no
was,
problem.
I was just typing a thank you in there, and is it cody.fritz@noaa.gov?
Yes. Yep.
I have a question offline, so
Okay.
thanks.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, Ashley, I think that's a great next step for us to pursue. So I just want to thank all of our panelists this morning for your time and your engagement, and thank everybody for joining us. Kate, I look forward to hearing from you. If anybody has anything else that you think will help our group, we'll be happy to get together or send questions out. Ashley's been a great one at putting this together. So thank you to Ashley and the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council for helping put this together.
Yeah, thanks, Cathie, and thanks to the panelists. I really appreciate y'all.